Cutting costs comes with a cost.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Bank of America. Bank of America is committed to helping businesses of all sizes make every move matter. Learn more at bankofamerica.com/banking for business.
For Marketplace, I'm Nova Safo in for David Brancaccio. We're continuing to follow reports that the Trump administration has fired more than 6,000 workers at the IRS, many of them in collections and enforcement. Those job cuts come with their own costs. They have to do with what in business is called return on investment. Marketplace's Justin Ho reports.
A few years ago, Nathan Hendren, an economics professor at MIT, found that when the IRS audits somebody, it costs the agency roughly $6,000 to $7,000 on average. And when it audits people with higher incomes,
those audits get a little more complicated and we end up spending just over $10,000 on those audits.
But Hendren also looked at how much the IRS receives when it does an audit. Turns out for people on the bottom half of the income spectrum, the IRS pretty much breaks even. And for those with the highest incomes,
every dollar we spend delivers more than $12 in revenue back to the U.S. Treasury.
Hendren says that's not only because audits pull in lost revenue, it's also because of what happens next.
Those people end up changing their ways going forward, and you deliver back a lot more revenue to the government, even in the future years.
Another factor pushing up the IRS's return on investment, the basic taxpayer services it provides, says Nina Olson, executive director of the Center for Taxpayer Rights.
Everything from the IRS publishing publications and forms to answering the phones on tax law questions to processing returns.
Olson says those services help the IRS take in revenue by helping taxpayers who have questions or unique situations or even a dispute over a tax return.
And people need to be there to work through those issues so the return can go its merry way into the system to be processed.
Olson says cutting staff will slow down those services, making it harder for taxpayers to get the help they need. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
And there's news this morning that the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration is laying off an unspecified number of workers as part of the ongoing cost-cutting efforts. The Washington Post pegs the cuts at 10% and says they include reducing by half a team tasked with regulating autonomous vehicles. Let's do the numbers. Overseas markets signaled relief after election results in Europe's biggest economy, Germany, left mainstream candidates in charge versus a far-right party that's been gaining popularity. Germany's DAX index is up 0.8%. Meanwhile, Wall Street is pointing higher in pre-market trading. Dow futures are up 0.6%. S&P futures are up 0.5%. NASDAQ futures are also up 0.5%.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Progressive Insurance. Progressive is currently looking for individuals in a variety of career fields who are interested in building a career and joining an inclusive and unique culture. More information, including application, at progressive.com/careers.
Now to the Marketplace Economic Pulse, regular checkups from a range of perspectives. Today, we hear from Clara Mattei, professor of economics at the University of Tulsa in Oklahoma. She's also director of the newly established Center for Heterodox Economics, which aims to reimagine how we measure economic progress, prioritizing people's experiences. She spoke with Marketplace's David Brancaccio.
Heterodox, I had to look it up again, unorthodox. What's the mistake orthodox approaches to economics we're making that needs new thinking from your team?
It is absolutely timely to rethink economics in a broader pluralist way so that we're not stuck in abstract and narrow methods that ultimately hide rather than explain what happens in the real world.
One remedy for abstraction is to bring it down to earth and put people into the equation. Is there a greater focus on the human experience and the type of work that your center wants to do?
The idea is that economics is not a hard science. It has been presented this way to give absolute authorities to experts that ultimately a lot of times justify economic systems that exclude people from decision making. And as I worked in my own research, I showed that actually neoclassical economics a lot of times supports authoritarian regimes. So instead, the idea is that economics is based on social relations, that people are at the center of the economy, and thus we need to understand these social relations as something that can evolve, and thus we can have a greater say in what our economy should look like.
The orthodox economic indicators had been showing the U.S. economy was in many ways fine and dandy. Many people didn't feel it was fine and dandy. So do you think some of your approaches to putting the experience of real people back into the analysis would resolve, I hate to use a big 50-cent word, but resolve the dichotomy? Economic indicators saying things are great, people saying not so great.
This is exactly the point. People feel the economic injustices on their own skins, but there's no tools to understand these because the type of economics we're exposed to operates to hide these problems. So the center is trying to say, if we want to be academics and intellectuals and grow a generation of students that can really tackle issues for people, we need a different approach to economics. The agenda of economics has to be inspired by what people feel and live, and so people can be empowered by these tools in order to potentially participate for a better economic system.
Professor Mattei, I don't want to be a spoil sport, but I do have to raise this issue, which is there was a lot of talk like this in 2009 and 2010 after the great financial collapse, that mainstream economics didn't see it coming, that mainstream economics needs new tools. And yet here we are all these years later, and you're forced to innovate again in this space. Do you think it'll stick this time?
That's the real challenge. This is something that is ultimately a political battle. Academic battles are political battles because they are based on resources and the will of institutions. The University of Tulsa has the energy and the courage to give us the resources to start up this institution. We cannot do this alone, but I do think that we can serve as an example that may be able to multiply, in which we say we can be a place of serious, courageous scholarship.
That's Clara Mattei. She's director of the newly established Center for Heterodox Economics and a professor of economics at the University of Tulsa. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that was David Brancaccio with that interview. And I'm Nova Safo with the Marketplace Morning Report. From APM, American Public Media.